Thank you, everybody, for joining us here today for our ASU, Arizona State University Critical Issue Series event. My name is Liz Lightfoot, and I'm the director here at ASU School of Social Work. I realize that today is a difficult day, and it's a difficult month for us in the United States, but we have a good topic to talk about today because we're fortunate to have Dolores Goto, who will be talking us today about Journeys of Issei to Sansei Generations, a century of Japanese American stories for social workers. So I'm very happy to have Mrs. Goto with us. She goes by Dee, and I think she's a perfect person to talk to us for Asian American and Pacific Islander Heritage Month. And full disclosure, I've known her nearly my entire life, and she's been an excellent role model for me. I'll give you a little bit of background about her. And I've tried to keep this short, but I think I might have gotten a little long. So Mrs. Goto is a Sansei, which is a third generation Japanese American who was born and raised in sort of on the Oregon-Idaho border area, the Treasure Valley area. And she moved to Seattle to attend school where she received her degree in psychosocial nursing from the University of Washington. And she's been involved in heritage preservation since the 1970s. In the 1970s, she helped archive taped interviews of notable individuals from the Seattle area related to the Pacific Northwest Japanese experience for the University of Washington. And you can actually still see these interviews on the University of Washington's website, which I'll drop in the chat. And Mrs. Goto, along with her husband, Sam, who was both a dental technician and artist, started the, and I'm probably pronouncing it right, the Amoide program. Did I get that right, Mrs. Goto?
Right.
Yeah, in 1991, which is now a program of the Japanese Cultural and Community Center of Washington, which helps people preserve their own stories through writing and workshops. And these have led to a number of published books about Japanese American stories, which are great for everyone, including children. And these groups are still continuing today. She also helped start the Densho Project in the 90s, which documented the stories of Japanese Americans who were incarcerated during World War II. And it has a really fabulous website where you can find all sorts of stories of the Japanese American experience during World War II. And she also helped incorporate the Nikkei Heritage Association of Washington, which now serves as the Japanese Cultural and Community Center of Washington. And aside from all of this work as a heritage preservationist, she's also been an entrepreneur and a business person. She's been running a successful nutrition business for years. She's also a mom and a grandmother of 5. And so I'm very excited to get to interview Mrs. Goto today. And we thought it might be more interesting to learn about her experiences with storytelling and to share some stories this way in a discussion format. And if you have questions to ask yourself, please go ahead and put them in the Q&A session, and we will get to those as well. So I want to first of all thank Mrs. Goto for joining us here today. And I'm going to sort of start off and ask you why can you tell us about how you first got involved in collecting these stories of the Japanese American experience?
Well, let me, it's kind of a universal calling, actually. One day when the kids were really little, I got this phone call from somebody that I didn't know, and I had not lived in Seattle that long. And they asked me if I would help start this Japanese collection at the University of Washington of the Pacific Northwest Japanese experience. And I was a nurse and I had nothing to do with history or anything like that. And so I said no. But Sam, my husband, he was interested and he made me call the person back. He was actually a professor of psychiatry. He was of Japanese heritage, and so that's how it got started. And it was the beginning. So I went to the university library archives, and also the person who was supposed to be my go-to, she was brand new. So we started with they just said, go out And we figured it out all by ourselves.
And you taped people? Did you interview them, get oral histories?
Well,
or is
so
that
then
how
it
you
was
did
Sam that bought me a tape recorder. And then I started figuring out who some of the leaders in the community were and started making appointments. And I guess I'm good at that. So it was no problem.
So you've gone on to then do this in different ways, you know, writing, collecting stories, teaching people how to write their own stories. And can you tell us a little bit about those projects too?
Well, that was later. So then
Later, okay.
the funding ran out basically in 1970 to 72, somewhere around there. And so then the kids were in grade school. And when they finished high school, I decided to go back and get my master's. And then after that time, I felt like, well, nothing more has been happening to this collection, because that's documentation of the Japanese experience. So I thought, well, let's create some of our own documentation. And so then I got, this is where it's funny because it's a calling, because back when I was in college at the Lewis and Clark in Portland, the first generation people wanted us, because of discrimination, actually, probably also wanted us to meet other people of our own ethnicity, right? So they would arrange these conferences and teenage get-togethers. And so I went to one from college because the Methodist Youth Fellowship was meeting in Portland that year. And it's really funny because this person, the girls were sitting on one side of the gymnasium in chairs, and the boys, you know, were all clear on the other side, standing in groups. And this one gentleman came over and asked me to dance. And he was from Seattle. And so 30 some years later, he's one of the ones that helped start this Omoide group that was our writing group. So that's how life goes.
Yeah, that's how life goes. So how many books have you published off of that project?
We're on number 6.
6, okay.
And so we're gearing it toward 5th grade, but we're finding that adults are enjoying the stories just as much.
Sure. So why do you think collecting these stories and taping them or writing them down or having people write down their own is important?
Well, because, you know, my field is psychology and I love psychology. I really didn't like nursing, but I went and took nurses training because that's the only way I could afford to put myself through college. But I was happy to be a stay-at-home mom when all this got started. And I have learned subsequently, of course, that one of the first things in starting to write down stories, I needed to know who I was and what that, there's a video by somebody by the name of Bob Beal who says that 4th grade is the time when you change from being a tape recorder of, you know, your parents' values and so forth, and you start thinking on your own. And if you go back to that time, you and like if you had one friend or several friends, it seems like that carries on to adulthood, that those qualities that I had. So then I of course I, you know, started reading all kinds of books about writing as much as I could, and that's where it all got started. And so every other, you know, podcast that I listen to these days start with the fact that you have to write your own stories and share stories.
So how do you think the storytelling is good for Japanese American people as a community? Is it a sort of a community building or culture sharing activity?
Well, certainly the essence of the Omoide writing group, as far as I'm concerned, is that we share our Japanese heritage values and pass them on. So one of the stories that I tell people is that when our first daughter, Lynette, was born, for the whole first year, I would just sit and watch her crying, sleeping, eating, and so forth, thinking, what a miracle this is. And so I thought, what can I do to help her be the kind of parent that would teach her children to be a parent? Because I figured that I would see my great grandchildren in my lifetime, and that's happening.
Yeah.
And good example is the fact that I'm staying here in Berkeley right now with my older daughter, because her daughter Avery graduated from Chapman University last Saturday. And then her son, Zachary, is going to graduate from Notre Dame High School here in the Los Angeles area next Saturday. And just, it's not very Japanese to brag, but he, as a result of Lynette and how she raises children and is a mother and a parent, I give her credit for all of this. He's the all-American swimmer.
That's great.
And a week ago Friday, he finished 6th in the state championship.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah.
So I think maybe you're, when you're, I've heard a lot of your stories over the years, and sometimes I think your stories can really help us understand, especially the historical ones where we might have read them in a textbook or vaguely heard about them. But when you can talk about how, you don't even have to talk about the policy, but when you talk about how that changed the course of someone's life or what they had to do, I think that's really powerful. And I think, like, not just negatively, but also the nuances and how people survived and thrived despite challenges too. So I'm thinking about the story about how your mother-in-law lost her citizenship and what she did. And do you know this?
Sure. Okay.
Yeah.
Let me back up just a little bit.
Okay.
What I'm excited about today in sharing all of this, especially, this is interesting supposedly to a social work group,
Right.
is the importance of learning stories from each other and asking questions. And this today is really helpful to me because I lost my husband 4 years ago. And so I'm sort of on a new path. And one of the things that I've written down is that I want to be an infinite parent. And that means that this goes on and the stories go on. And my husband and I did all the work that we did because we wanted these stories to be, read and heard by future generations. So
Right.
I'm using a theme. When I go to juvenile detention centers, for instance, I ask the kids, I tell them to start with, I says, now I want you to remember that you saw this little old Japanese lady come and talk to you about some of the things. And I said, how many of you have had something unfair happen to you? So of course they raise their hands. Everybody raises their hands. And so I wanted to use this principle of the Dharma, which is a Japanese folk, sort of folk story tale. The Dharma is supposedly a priest that meditated so long he lost his arms and legs. But we also use it in the Japanese community because you push on the Dharma and it sits right back up again. Okay, so what you're asking me to right now is a story about some of the adversity that we faced, our parents faced as immigrants to the United States, and how basically we got back up again. And the story of my mother-in-law is that she her father was here. And so she's second generation. And she had her citizenship as a result of being born here. But when she married my father-in-law, who was a first generation Japanese immigrant, she lost her citizenship. It was the Cable Act in somewhere around 1929. And so it wasn't until 1952 when the McCarran Act came legal, where Japanese could get their citizenship, that she got her citizenship back. And so we remember our parents and grandparents studying like crazy in 1952. But let me go back just a little bit. The reason the Japanese immigrants could not buy property and own land was because people who did not have a citizenship could not own property. And that started clear back in 1790 and probably was designed for the Black community at that time. But we were considered aliens, and we were not allowed to get our citizenship until 1952.
And so your grandfather and Sam's grandfather, who were both dairy farmers.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So were they
I should tell you about them.
Yeah, tell me about them.
Okay. Sam and I were married 10 years before I got this job at the university. And when we got married, everybody was so happy, but we thought nothing of it. Sam and I were the first ones in his family and my family, basically, to get married as third generation. And what I found out when I went to the University of Washington, there was one box of archival material there that I had to go through. And I found out that my grandfather and Sam's grandfather had been best friends back when they were one of the 100 dairy farmers that supplied as much as half of Seattle's milk supply. I think this was in the era between 1910 and 1920. And they were discriminated out of the business. And because of that, my grandfather started over in Eastern Oregon. He migrated to where the Waihe Dam provided some opportunity for row crop farming. And so that's where I grew up. And then Sam and I married, and we found out that my grandfather was at Sam's grandfather's deathbed because he took some poison accidentally. He thought it was some stomach medicine sitting on the kitchen shelf.
Oh my gosh.
My grandfather stayed up all night with him and was asked to look out for Sam's mother's family. Now, this is Sam's mother's family. Look out for the 10 children that were in the family. And there's many stories I can tell you about that. But basically, I'm saying that because of the discrimination kind of thing, the dairy history does not say anything about the Japanese as part of their history. So I want to write some articles about that.
Yeah, well, I think that's like, they probably just aren't focusing on that at all. So if you don't do it, who will?
That's one of the things that I'm thinking about. Right.
So when you grew up in Eastern Washington, that your family wasn't in the camps, right?
Right, but there's one more story that I found in researching, that there was a pioneer that came across the western to the west in a covered wagon, and there's a note of her diary at the Ontario Library there, And she says that thousands and thousands of years will never make this place livable. And that was in her diary. So that's the kind of place that
That's
we
where you
migrated
live.
to.
Yeah.
And that's where the camp, the incarceration camp was also,
Right.
in those
Okay.
kind of places.
So did you visit the camp when you were?
Yes, we did.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it was, now I think that, there's Densho, and you can hear thousands of stories of how unfair this all was. But those of us that were there already, we envied the people in camp because they didn't have to cook anymore, and they had kids to play with and everything. So when we visited them, my mother was all envious of the fact that they could do all of their crafty stuff and sewing and making jewelry and all that kind of thing. But so this is a little
That's
bit
ironic. Yeah.
other aspect,
Yeah.
everything isn't just,
So can you tell more about what the Densho project is?
Well, the Densho project is recording stories like I did more formally. We're what's that Jewish museum?
The Holocaust Museum?
Well, anyway,
Yeah.
Stephen was it Steven Spielberg who did a lot of that stuff.
Sure.
We had some associates who suggested that we do the same thing as that Holocaust museum kind of thing. And that's when we started the Densho and started interviewing stories. And that's culminated in, I noticed there's a book written by the guy who wrote Boys in the Boat, and
Oh, yeah.
Daniel Brown, Facing the Mountain, about all the things that the Japanese did as far as the 442nd. They were the most decorated unit in all of American history. And these are all of our aunts, I'm not aunts, uncles, but there were some women there. There were something like 3,300 men and women who volunteered for serving in the army from the Japanese community.
Mhm. Well, that's impressive when they were being incarcerated. at the
Right.
time. So the Densho project focused specifically on the forced migration and
And the incarceration. Right.
Yeah. Were some of the people that you interviewed for in the Omoide books, were they in the camps?
Oh, they were all in the camps.
They were all in the camps. Yeah.
There's just a few of us. There were the population of the Japanese community in 1942, when everyone went to camp, was 127,000. And according to some records, there were about 120,000 of them in the West Coast states. But several of us, we were there already, left the West Coast, the restricted zone on their own. So 110,000 people. So University of Arizona, I noticed, has 44,000 plus individuals. So it's, as is the whole university campus, everybody, all the staff and everything, twice that amount that were incarcerated in these 10 camps.
So how did the people who were then in your writing groups writing the stories, were they used to sharing about that?
No, that's why it was, impactful, because back to my story. Then Sam and I didn't know, because nobody talked about anything. We didn't know that our grandparents had been best friends.
Oh,
it was
that's
crazy.
Funny. No wonder they were happy. Yeah,
because they didn't want to share their bad times with us and so forth. Well, of course, anybody, who's gone through a huge trauma, you need some time to,
Right.
process it.
Did they find it, did they enjoy doing it? How did you get them to feel comfortable writing their stories?
Well, what can I say? Not everybody would do it,
Yeah,
but some of us had to start.
right.
And so then well, one of the things I did when I helped develop the Japanese Cultural Center is I went and interviewed people from all the different ethnic societies. And what I'm finding out is that in every situation, the Germans, the Irish, it took the third generation to get started in telling these stories. And I am one of the older third generation
Right.
people.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
So, but some of them did they enjoy it? Some of them? Telling
Yes.
them stories?
Yeah, and so we really have a good time now.
Yeah.
And okay, the first thing I did with the four of us that actually met in my kitchen on Mercer Island there, where you and I know each other.
Mhm.
What I found out we needed to do is just share conversation and talk and find out from each other. Just like I asked Miguel, where he grew up. And let me tell you a story. When I was flying down here last Friday, there was a gentleman sitting in the row ahead of me, and he was talking the whole trip from Seattle to Burbank like crazy. And so finally, he was talking to the person across the aisle from him, but he was going on and on about how he was going to his aunt's attic down here in Burbank, and that he was going to write up the story of his dad. And his grandfather evidently was a German soldier of some kind who escaped. He didn't believe in all of what was going on. And he was going on and on about how important the stories. So I interjected myself and I said, well, why do you think the stories are important? He says that's what we need to do. That's what we're supposed to do. And he said, and I says, well, who are you trying to tell these stories to? He says, well, I want my kids and grandkids to understand all of what went on with our heritage.
Mhm.
So that was interesting that I would run into somebody right in front of me.
You're right. That's right. And so do you think about that when you're collecting this? So this is
I do.
grandkids
And one of the things that I want to be sure of, anybody who's listening to our talk today, that it's important in my mind that I do things to make a difference in one of my, I was asking you, Liz, do you remember when my daughter Kelly and you are best friends from first grade, right?
Right.
And do you remember when Kelly was interviewed for on King TV as one of the stars of tomorrow in high school?
Vaguely.
And they came and the King TV film crew came and photoed our bathroom. Okay, because Sam has all kinds of sayings and mantras and so forth up in our bathroom. And that's, I don't know if you remember that.
Of course, yes.
But right now, one of the things I have up there is being involved in things that make life better is one of my mantras. That so when I'm sitting on the stool, I'm reading this mantra.
So that's your big advice.
Right. And I think that there was a time when we lived on Capitol Hill in Seattle where I was asked to help teach a class of kids, we tutored them actually. We had our own classroom, but they would come into our classroom and we would tutor them. And Juanita Thomas and I were the teachers in that classroom. And this was when your friend Kelly was in first grade, or no, she did a kindergarten. And 10 years later, after we had moved, to suburban Seattle area, Lynette, our older daughter, was on a drill team for the Mercer Island High School. And so we were at Newport with one of the events, and I was sitting in the bleachers. This is really, like 10, 15 miles outside of Seattle. This kid comes running up to me and he says, Mrs. Goto, remember me? He was one of the ones that I had tutored way back. And that's so satisfying.
Right.
And you're right. And so I think one of the things I listened to recently that I love is Malcolm Gladwell and Talking to Strangers. And like this, story that I just told you about the airplane ride. And I'm not afraid to ask people these questions, and starting, with asking them where they grew up or what their heritage is. Everybody's willing to talk. And that's what social work is all about, getting people to talk. And so stories kind of engage us, but then the next process is to actually, help make this a better world, right? And do something about it.
Absolutely. So I want to ask you, that there's been, I don't know if it's a rise, there's a rise in hate crimes against Asian people, but from your stories, you can see that it's, that's happened all along. It's not a new thing. I want to know what your take on this is, and what you teach your children and grandchildren about this, and what you think social workers should think or do.
Well, a lot of these crimes, so to speak, I'm thinking of the perpetrators of these people.
Right.
They want some more meaning in their life, and they're falling into like the social media kind of things where they get some feedback from things happening. Okay. And so I try to look at a bigger perspective and not get all emotional about any single thing. And what to me is, if we as social workers, we start talking to people and getting them to engage in their own, well-being and their own lives. And so this is a kind of an incentive for us to do that, because all of this is happening. And in life in general, starting our white Western culture is built from somebody, let's say like Tolstoy or Dostoevsky. And what they say is that every one of us have the possibility of being one of the German prison guards, okay, in us. But we have to think and civilize ourselves and hold those things at bay, because you don't want a person who doesn't have that, because what gives us the opportunity to do whatever we do is the courage. And you have to be kind of a little bit assertive to have this courage. And so then, so did I answer your question, or am I going around?
I don't know. So, I think that, like when I've read a lot of your stories and heard them, and it seems like that Japanese Americans that, and you've told some stories right now that they've been experiencing discrimination. They couldn't become citizens. They had their farm taken away from them. They got sent to camps and lost all of their possessions.
Correct.
So it's not a new it's not a new activity that there's Asian American hate, but I don't know what, how I guess how social workers can work to end it or work to respond to it.
That hopefully I will give. I'm gonna do this for myself.
Yeah.
But I want you also to download the drawing that my husband did about the Dharma principle.
Oh, yeah, I can share that if you want me
Uh-huh.
to. Yeah, I think I've got that up.
And so that's 7 times down and 8 times up.
Wait, stop share. That was not it. Where is it? I'll see if I can find it. 7 times down, 8 times up.
Right.
Okay.
We put that on a t-shirt and got one for everybody at our Sam and my 50th anniversary.
Can you
Because
see
that's
it?
one of the principles that I hope that everyone will take away from our discussion today.
So what is, tell me what it means.
So it's part of our culture that most people with Japanese heritage know this. And as I explained a little earlier, that the Dharma comes from this religious Zen founder who lost his limbs sitting too long in prayer. And the ability to raise oneself up again, even when pushed down, is the message of resilience and silence or strength that we want to in facing adversity. And but one more principle of this is that you can buy these dolls, or you can buy pictures, or you can download pictures or print out pictures. So go ahead and use this one for now, but you notice that the Dharma has blank eyes. And the dolls, if you buy at some of the Japanese stores where they sell Japanese items, they come with blank eyes, and you put in the right eye print pupil when you make a goal or develop a decision as something that you want to work toward. And then when that is accomplished, you put in the other eye. And so my suggestion is that each one of us do this, and I'm going to do this for myself again when I get home, because one of the areas that I'm moving toward is to do podcasts. And it's daunting. I'm not that great in all of this, computer stuff, but my daughter says that she's going to, help me put together what I need to do a regular podcast. And so I'm going to start putting some of our stories into a podcast. I already have a blog, and one of the reasons I started the Japanese Cultural and Community Center way back, that was in 2003 that we actually incorporated. The Washington State Department of Education analyzed the census, the US Census for 1980, and they had a readout of various ethnic groups, and they compared us to each other, like the whites and the Hispanic and American Indian and Chinese, and I forget, there were several of it. But what that research showed was that Japanese, the people, those of us with Japanese heritage, had the most per capita income and the most white collar jobs. That meant that we had the resources, if we worked at it, to develop a cultural center. And that's turned out. Several of the ethnic communities can't put together a cultural center in building like we have, because we do have the resources. And so what I can see is that if we share our cultural values and some of our, well, like we have what's called a Children's Day. There's May the 5th is Cinco de Mayo, but in the Japanese culture, was originally Boys' Day, but we've usurped that, and we at our cultural center we call that Children's Day now. But we also have moved it to a weekend when people can come, and thousands of people come to see the crafts like origami and get to hit the drums like the taiko drums and see a demonstration of the martial arts like judo and so forth. And all of these cultural arts, they're exciting, and I like the principles that they teach the kids.
So did you think that when you started doing this, you would end
Yes.
up with a large cult? You did. You had a goal.
Yes, we did.
Yeah.
And it's working, really well. And what my at a board meeting now, when we have a retreat, they ask me questions like, what do I want to see at the cultural center? And what I want to see is 100 years from now that the Japanese Cultural Center of Washington is on the Seattle tour of people when they come and see Seattle.
Right.
That's one of my goals.
And that was its location is in the old Japanese school, right?
It is. It's right in the heart of Seattle, and we have, if we can keep it going, it all takes money, a Japanese garden for people to, come, and I don't know what I don't know if we can keep it open all the time. I think you have to have a request because of the issues with, the vagrants that are around.
So if for other groups, other than Japanese groups, can you see the story? What advice would you give for starting to collect stories in the way that you did?
Okay, the main thing is talking to people,
right?
Finding out the stories, and it just broadens our perspective as to how we should live each of our own lives. That's where I think it's going. I have recently titled myself Infinite Parent.
Right.
That means that, okay, where that comes from is a podcast that I've been watching by someone by the name of Simon Sinek. And he believes in infinite leadership. He says that that's the most missing thing in our society today, including the presidents. They are not being leaders. There was a time when we wanted, world peace, and those kind of things were what the leaders talked about. Where are we on that?
Not very far. It doesn't seem like.
Yeah. And so anyway, he calls himself an infinite leader, and that means that he's still learning, still working, and he's still progressively trying to figure out ways to make this a better world. And I look at that as far as parenting goes. A lot of my parenting principles came from the fact that I helped start the Suzuki violin school in Seattle. And I could care less if my girls were virtual violin players. and of course, they didn't go very far because I didn't expect them to. They only, kids only go as far as the parent that's teaching them, right? And so, but I think that is where in Dr. Suzuki is from Japan, and he studied in Germany. And he went back to Japan, and his family were violin makers. And so then he started, it's not as widely known as I thought, but it is a worldwide program. You can look it up. It's called the Suzuki Method. And naively, I was maybe like 26 years old at that time, and we never went out to restaurants. And so you know what I did? I invited him to lunch at my house. He came to Seattle. and the thing that he taught was that he started at the age of 3, that every child can be educated. And he taught a kindergarten group, and he raised their IQ by 10 points by getting them to memorize sayings and poems and so forth. Anyway, the principle with that is that when you start with a 3-year-old, the parent has to come along for the lesson. And so you have the teacher and the parent and the child, okay? And that's how we take lessons, okay? And that makes sense, right?
Right.
Well, becoming an adult means that within ourselves, we need to be our own teacher, parent, and child. I need to take care of the child within me as my own parenting, and I need to learn from podcasts and sessions like this and keep studying. And stories is where it starts, because stories engage our feelings and emotions. But unless we put thinking to those feelings and emotions, but we need a third, like 3 legs on a stool, right? You need a third about doing and putting it to use. And that's where today I'm going to implore each of you to download the Dharma principle and make some kind of commitment.
Okay, so
for the next kind of something along the lines of next 6 months to a year of something that we want to accomplish.
Okay, so I'm going to first ask if there's anybody who has any questions, and then we'll probably end with us actually doing this, right?
Right.
Yeah. So does anyone have any questions? You can type it in if you do, or if you're just enjoying listening to us. I'm not seeing any coming up, so maybe we should go ahead and you can tell us what we should do to end up to make our goal. Should I share this?
There's a little bit of repetition, but think of some commitment that you want to make toward making this a better world that you can do. Do you have a thought, Liz, of what you might think about? And then once you have decided, for instance, in my case, I'm gonna put in the right eye. I'm gonna darken in the pupil of the right eye of the Dharma for starting my podcasts. Okay, so that's.
And so then when you finish it, then you color.
Then I put in the left eye.
Left eye.
Okay, and so
I'm going to say, as we're thinking about this, there was a question that said, what kind of reaction have younger generations had to these stories from the older generations?
well, um, we've gone to, you know, hundreds of schools, and one time I was at the school in Kent, which is about 17 miles south of Seattle. And one of the first things I do when I get to the school, if it's a whole gymnasium full of people, I don't do this, but in a smaller classroom where there's about 20 kids, I go to each one of them and I ask them what their heritage is. And then I say, and most of them know somewhat. And then I say, is there somebody that you can go and ask them about their stories? And this one kid, he says his heritage is Sacagawea. It was so neat. Yeah. And that kind of thing. And and so when I talk to them like that, they get animated and they get involved and they talk to me. So maybe asking questions, learning how to ask questions. But the biggest thing, one of the podcasters, what was her name? Celeste something or other, Headley. Her name is Celeste Headley, and she has a TED Talk, and she has a list of points on how we can become better listeners. That's the biggest. Mm-hmm. You know, one of the goals person could set, you know, is to find out how many people they can get to tell where they grew up.
Right. Well, somebody just asked, do you think the stories you've collected could be made into a TV series or a movie?
Oh, of course, but you know, you need the skills and the group, and you need but I do have some connections in that area.
Yeah.
My son-in-law here where I'm staying is a TV editor for Disney.
And so maybe you can get him going on that.
We watched the other night Death on the Nile.
Oh yeah.
A Agatha Christie movie.
Right.
And that was one of his, you know, kind of not his.
Yeah.
He works with a bunch of people.
Yeah.
But he's gotten awards for doing this. So maybe we can, you know, I never thought about that.
Well, now you've got another thing to put in a pupil.
That's right. That's right.
Okay, so well, maybe we can all think right now about what our goal, or do you call them goals? Is that what it is? A goal?
Well, I hate to say goals.
Okay.
I would rather see commitments.
Commitments, okay.
What do you have a suggestion or two?
Well, I'm trying to think of what my commitment. So it's a little different than a New Year's resolution, right? So it's not about commitment to yourself per se, but commitment to making the world a better place, right?
Right. And and you're gonna get knocked down.
Yeah.
And so basically, you know, you can count on being knocked down 7 times, but what am I going to do?
To get back up, get back up, get up 8.
Yeah.
I love it. Yeah, I don't know, you know, I'm thinking about, because I'm the director of this big school of social work. So I'm like trying to think about how people can sort of come together in a way after not being.
That's true, but what I want to see us do is do something personal that we're going to do with our own.
Well, that's what I'm thinking of, like what I can do to make that happen.
Oh, okay, right.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking about. So I've actually been thinking about that lately, what I can do to make that happen.
What's one, you know, distinctive commitment that
I don't know if that's a good one for this though. Okay, I'll do a more relevant one, is about because I've been thinking a lot today about guns and gun control, and so actually taking a stand on that and doing something
Liz, I think
Yeah.
that's good, but that's too big on my part.
Oh, okay, so this has
okay.
to be smaller. Okay, give me
Something
one.
really personal, you know,
Person-
something that maybe with your one of your daughters, or what sharing your writing down enough of your heritage that your kids will, you
Oh,
know.
I can do that. I'm writing a book about my grandfather right now. So
Okay,
start
okay, that's the
working on
kind of
that.
thing. Yeah,
Start working
that's
on that
personal.
again.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's the kind of thing you're talking about.
that I want to see a start with, you know, and that'll
So in 6 months, I will have done something on that.
right,
Yes,
exactly.
okay, there's
Exactly.
mine.
Yeah, that's the kind
So-
of thing.
Okay, so now everybody else can do that as well. And if you want to put something in the chat about what your goal is, you can do that now too, if you can think of a commitment.
Because to me, a goal is just out there. It's the doing, you know, that I want to make sure we do.
And we're actually committing to doing it, not just having a
Right.
goal. That
Uh-huh.
makes sense.
And so, well,
Okay,
it's just that we think of a goal as being too big
right.
in general,
Yeah,
and we need these small little commitments.
yeah. Well, I want to thank you. We're at the end of our hour, so it's, you know, it's always easy and a pleasure to talk with you. So it was fun to be able to do this in front of other people as well. And I really I hope you enjoyed it. And I am sure people enjoyed hearing all that, you know, your ideas from all your experience doing this as well. So I was seeing a couple come in, making time to help my mother organize family papers that she is collecting from her late brother.
Right. That's great.
Yeah. So that's the kind of commitment.
Mm-hmm.
Great. So I'm sure if we could see everybody, they'd probably all clap now for you. So I'll clap. And I look forward to talking to you too soon. And we will, oh wait, there's one more hand up. Oh no, I think it's down. Sorry. We will be putting this up on our web so people can watch this at a later time if they're interested as well. So thank you so much.
You know, Liz, let's just do one more pitch for
Okay.
narrowing this down even more.
Oh, okay.
Something to do with learning more about our heritage.
Learning more about our heritage. Okay.
Yeah, you know,
Yeah.
some commitment, talking to Auntie so-and-so.
Yeah.
Going through. Yeah, that's probably easier.
It's an easier one. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then
Not
you
so
can share
big.
that with your kids too. Yeah.
That's exactly right.
Yeah. Exactly. Okay. Thank you so much.
Sure.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye.